This is me at the age of 5. I wanted to be a magician, and so I tried to teach myself card tricks. At the age of 8, I wanted to become a writer, and so I read every single book I could get my hands on. At 14, I wanted to become a doctor, and so I started to read health manuals. At 17, I wanted to become a physicist, and so I went to CERN to learn physics. At 20, I wanted to become a medical artist, and so I taught myself to paint and draw. At 25, I wanted to become a consultant, so I taught myself business and marketing. You basically get the idea. Ever since I can remember, I've been so anxious about the fact that I can't do everything, because I really want to. I want to learn it all, feel it all, experience it all before it's all gone, and this very often leads me to overcommit to things and then struggle with maintaining my passion to finishing them and seeing them to the end. Somewhere between planning and execution, my desire for things often gets lost, and the way that I dream and imagine them being does not match the reality of doing them in real life. And as sexy and empowering as quitting has sometimes been made to sound to me, it often is just not an option, or it's not the best option. So as someone who has gone through so many cycles of genuinely wanting something only to feel that I absolutely must immediately quit it later, I think I finally accepted that there are things that I can specifically do in order to maintain my passion for doing something long term. Because I often can feel that my only two options are to quit something or to painfully stick through it, which can be not fun and lead to very mediocre performance in my case. But actually, I've finally accepted that there is such a thing as a third option. So today I've put together a 4-step framework that collects everything I've found through both science and my excruciatingly collected personal experience about that third space and increasing our passion and motivation for sticking to things long term without wanting to quit them. Let's get straight into it. So the very first step in stopping myself from quitting a task is perhaps a counterintuitive approach to motivation, which involves isolating all of the object results that I am due from a task that I'm supposed to do and completely ignoring them in favor of skills instead. Now, the reason for this is that I've realized two fairly obvious things. The first thing being that if I don't have motivation to do a task, I am very, very likely going to want to quit this task very soon. And the second thing that I realize is that motivation is always there. There are things for my life for which I have endless sources of motivation, and there are things for my life which at the same time I have no motivation at all. So the issue isn't that I'm lacking energy or motivation as a person, it's just, I believe, that I am attaching these sources of motivation to the wrong thing within a task that just cannot fuel that motivation, and therefore it never grows for that specific task. And I genuinely think that tying my source of motivation to any sort of object result for a task, be that something good or bad, something I'm interested or not interested in, is always a bad long-term strategy, because it guarantees that the motivation will at some point disappear, while tying this motivation to skills fuels it consistently long term. Let me explain exactly what I mean. So as an example here, I'm going to use a long-term project that I would have, which is, for example, to write an essay for university, and I hate writing essays, about child referral pathways, for example. And for any sort of task or project, there are going to be results that I'm due to get through this task, and these can all be divided into two categories: things that I'm interested in and things that I am not interested in, and I'll explain why in the long term both should be ignored. The easy one, let's say that the result of the essay is what my professor tells me, that the better you perform at this essay, the better grades you will get, and therefore the better you will be in the workplace. I don't care about this because it's not true. One, I've been in the workplace and no one cares about your grades, they care about your performance. And secondly, I've been in formal education for over 20 years at this point, I couldn't care less about grades. So this sort of result tied to a boring task is just never going to give me motivation, because I don't care for the task, I don't care for the result, there's nothing there. But the other thing that I used to depend on in the past, but is a mistake in my opinion, is depending on things that I temporarily or always care about, because they still will not fuel my motivation. For example, the result of doing the essay is that 1, I pass my medical school, and 2, that I become a doctor. And even though these seem like strong things, they're not enough to fuel motivation in the long term, because depending on how bad the task is and how much I hate doing it, then I'm going to start to get creative about different ways to get the same results, because I'm not that stupid. So I might think, well, I know I need to do this essay to pass medical school, but it's really boring. I don't want to do it now. I've never failed anything, and I could technically get away with failing this. So I have no motivation to do it and I don't want to do it. Or then, depending on how difficult multiple projects are, I start thinking, do I really need to be a doctor? Do I actually need to graduate? Maybe I could do other things to help people and make money. Is this actually necessary? So because these thoughts are running in the back of my mind, there's no way that I'm going to find motivation in these results in the long term. And so my proposal is that we completely ignore any sort of object results. So first, I'll find them all, what people have told me to care about, what I think I care about, any sort of result that I would get from doing the the task and I just scrap it and forget about it. And this is where things become interesting. What I do instead is I take the task and I break it down into all of its component skills, and I will go crazy with this. Every single small thing that is involved in this task. So I'll think, for example, writing this essay will make me a better writer, a better speaker, a better communicator. It will increase my typing speed potentially. It will help me structure arguments better. It will help me understand children more. It will help me understand how the systems in hospitals work. It might help me understand the English law system. It might help me understand how to communicate with younger people. It might help me understand and empathize with parents and different sort of patients in the hospital. So there's a bunch of skills here that are involved in this task. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross-reference this with my set of skills and values. And I have an exercise for this in the description in detail if you're interested in trying this out. But I'll try and think of what are the core skills and values in my life. And this is quite easy to come up with. So for example, I think I want to become a good parent one day. I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good communicator with people. I want to understand myself and my emotions better. And I can start then cross-referencing these things directly or in creative ways. So for example, writing an essay and actually really trying hard to structure my arguments properly will mean that I will have better insight into how my thoughts work and how to structure and communicate things, which then leads to these skills. And I can also think that thinking about where things go wrong with children in the healthcare system can then potentially help me understand how proper communication with children is done, and maybe that makes me a better parent in the future. Or then I can think that, well, communicating with things better in an essay will make me express myself and my thoughts and feelings better, and therefore will make me a better friend, etc., etc. I try to go for the crazy ones here just so I can make a point of there are so many connections that can be done. But by doing this thing, I'm therefore reframing this task in a completely different manner, where I don't care that it's an essay. I don't care that it's even tied with medical school. What I care about is that it is a vehicle for me to improve these skills, which are things that fuel my motivation a lot more. Because results are quite temporary, and depending on how zen I am, I tend to not care about the fact that I will become a doctor one day, or that I will become successful one day, or that I want to do these things. But I do care a lot more about things that I value, like being a better person and being more helpful to other people and communicating better and being more empathetic and loving. These are things that I have endless sources of motivation for, and therefore tying a task, no matter how boring, to these sort of skills makes this task then much more interesting, and it fuels a perspective and a shift in my mind on the way that I approach this task that actually leads me to so much better performance in them. Because even though realistically nothing has changed on the surface, I still need to just sit down and type in front of my computer. The marking criteria have not become easier. No one's done any sort of work for me. The task is just as boring in terms of what I have to write. But because I have this perspective shift, because I'm genuinely invested and motivated for certain aspects or angles of this essay, no matter how tangential, that often is just enough for me to get into doing this task with a whole lot of motivation, and therefore avoid this desire to quit it. So this is what I do for many different tasks and projects in my life. I have this list of skills really well broken down, so things that I want to do, everything that I see and I approach in my life, I kind of try to see what skills are involved in it, cross-reference them with things that I value, and then use the task that I need to do and I don't want to do as just a vehicle of improving myself, instead of focusing on the thing and the things that people tell me to care about, like making more money and passing exams and getting numbers here and there. This tends to be very helpful for me. I know it sounds quite selfish and self-focused, but it really, really helps in fueling motivation for things that I would otherwise be completely unable to find. So my second tool involves not quitting a task through preserving motivation, in keeping an eye on the progress that I am making and the strategies to avoid not doing things that don't move the needle. That's a mouthful. Let me try and break it down. So progress has been identified to be a major source of motivation, and this is both a positive and a very dangerous thing, because especially in the cases where we are actually doing work but we are not seeing any results, or not seeing the results, that progress that we want, we can be in a place where it's very, very easy to have no motivation and to absolutely want to quit something. And therefore, I think very often, especially me in my life, I have set myself up for failure, or at least made things so much harder for me to do, and not giving myself a proper shot at something that I could have potentially been good at, and I eventually ended up quitting because I have not been strategic about it in the beginning. This tool is called Always Meet Your Heroes. I'm going to use an example of YouTubers here. When I first started my YouTube channel, and especially before starting it, I thought that what it took to become a very successful YouTuber in terms of skills for educational YouTube would be to be quite confident, to be quite charismatic, to be very funny and interesting, and a very super passionate and extroverted person. When having met a lot of YouTubers with a few million subscribers at this point, and seeing how they are in person is very, very different to how I imagined them to be. And actually, the skills that they were scoring very highly on were neuroticism, obsession, introversion, ability to sit down and tweak things on their computers for days and days. And so I realized that they were very, very different to what I thought that they would be in person. And this kind of led me to the realization in many different times in my life, actually, that the skills that I think that are important to succeed in a certain task or domain are very often very different to the ones that are actually necessary. And therefore, when I meet people that are my heroes or people who are very successful in these fields, they end up being very confusing and a very disappointing, in a way, experience when I realized that they're so different, because I thought that it would mean that you need to be so funny to be successful at this, when actually what you need is to be kind of neurotically obsessed at things, which is a completely different set of skills. And so I think meeting your heroes is a perspective for thinking, wait, what is actually necessary to succeed at this task? And what are the skills that genuinely move the needle? Because we don't want to be caught very long term in a task that we don't enjoy, doing things that don't move the needle, because then we're wasting energy, not making progress, and we are really putting our motivation at risk. So especially with tasks that I already want to quit and tasks that I know I'm not likely to enjoy a lot, I very quickly in the beginning will make an assessment of what is going to move the needle. And that doesn't mean that I only do the painful work that I don't enjoy, but it does mean that I never completely ignore the skills and the things that are absolutely essential for this task. Because basically overnight, and with the same amount of work, I can get so much better results at something if I focus on the things that actually matter for it, rather than what I feel like doing or approaching things non-strategically. And this has been such a huge changer for me, because I did this for the longest time in absolutely everything. I focused on the wrong things. So in any sort of serious task, especially when we are wanting to quit, it does well to us to look at the people who are performing best and, if possible, communicate with them, or just otherwise really kind of think about the task critically and realize what are the things that are actually the most important here, and start focusing on those for a while. We are likely then to see results which are much, much better, and with progress comes increased motivation, which then keeps our desire to quit at bay, and we are doing much better at this task without wanting to leave it. My third tool is a very Elizabeth specific one, so if you don't resonate to my way of thinking, you might want to skip to the fourth one, because this might not be relevant. But this is basically a visual perspective that I keep in mind when I am approaching any sort of task that I am taking, and actually when I'm approaching anything in my life, in order to maintain consistent motivation for long periods of time. I can be quite a passionate and obsessive person, which has its good sides, but also has a lot of downsides. So on the positive end, it means that I learn things super fast, and I get very, very involved, and I get super passionate, and I can do work with very, very good results for some periods of time when I'm invested in something. But on the negative side, it means that I am very often caught in the weeds, and I completely lose perspective. And I think I'm on a path that, if I'm starting to not enjoy, I feel completely trapped and desperate, and as though I have no solutions, and I can very quickly spiral into a lot of anxiety around that task in general. What I do here is something that I call strategic detachment, and this is basically where I'm keeping my attachment and my passion in terms of the motivation and how intensely I perform at a task, but I'm becoming quite detached intentionally from my associations with the tasks and my identity, and trying to keep an overall perspective. So visually, the way that I see this is that very often for many different tasks or projects, and they can be big ones or small ones, like I'm going to medical school, I feel like I'm on this path of becoming a doctor, and if I take upon a task or responsibility, I feel like I'm on the path of completing it. And even if I read a book sometimes, as I've started, I might see myself as being on the path of finishing this book, and if I don't enjoy this thing, I feel trapped and very, very strongly more and more as though I want to completely escape, when quitting is not probably the best solution here. The solution is changing my perspective on everything. So the way that I see things now is that I am never on the path of any sort of task that I need to do. And this might sound grandiose, so I apologize, but I am on my path and my skills path. So everything that I'm moving towards is comprised just of me, my future, and the skills that I want to keep on it. And everything that I do is just a vehicle to improve these skills and myself, and it's not the actual path that I'm on. So I'm not becoming a doctor in the sense that I'm on the path of doing that. I'm becoming Elizabeth, and being a doctor is just a way for me to spend my time learning about the human body and helping people, and kind of getting to get closer to people and do things that I enjoy. It's just a vehicle for me to get to this goal. And when I start a book, or when I start a YouTube channel, I recognize that all of these things are temporary. I'm probably going to leave YouTube soon, and all of these different stuff are happening. These are just ways for me to improve skills that I care about. Communication skills, connection skills, empathy skills. How I want to spend my time and my life is my my perspective on these things. And I realized that this feels like a bit of a selfish approach, and practically it does not change things. If anything, it's helped me stop quitting so many things by just realizing I'm not trapped here. This is just something that I'm doing in order to get somewhere else. And so I know this is a bit of a wishy-washy one, but if we can, I would genuinely strongly recommend doing the exercise of finding your skills and the things that you value and focusing on them and yourself and the task, and kind of ignoring the task that you do and not feeling that you're sucked into them. That can help you not want to quit them in the long term, because you realize that you're valuing them only for the things that they are, and they are more temporary and fleeting, and we are never genuinely stuck somewhere. At least in our minds, we can always not be stuck somewhere, which I find to be insanely liberating. Lastly, I think that a strong trigger to want to quit something for me is performing badly at it consistently or not progressing in this thing. I realized that actually there's a perspective that I can change in order to switch this up very, very fast. And for me, that's called instinct building. So basically, I think that instincts are something that are massively underrated. Instinct is that ability that we can't put into words for why we know something, but we actually know that that is the case. So for example, when I'm in hospital, I see that nurses instinctively know when a patient is acutely unwell, even though they can't tell us or me specifically why that is, they just know. And that's an instinct of having seen this thing very many times. Sometimes I know that it's a good or bad time for me to do things or what to do, even without being able to explain why that's the case. I just simply know it because I have enough experience with myself. So I think that when I am not progressing and I'm feeling like quitting, telling myself that actually what's happening right now is that if I just become a bit more intentional and I realize what's happening, this is not futile. What I'm doing is increasing my instinct in the skills that I value in that task. And instinct is so invaluable. The reason for that is you can only get it through painful experience. No one can pay to get your instinct from you. They can pay to get you a response, but they can't get it. We can only accrue instinct for ourselves. No one can take it away from us, and no one can give it to us. And so it is an absolutely invaluable skill. I truly believe that any long-term intentional time I spent on a task is making me an expert at that task. And so intentionality is something that I focus on a lot. I try to create short feedback loops for everything that I do. Whenever I'm doing a task, even if it's completely boring or I'm performing badly at it, I try to think how every small thing I do leads to a response. And I try to be intentional about this. When I do things this way, this ends up. When I do things that way, this ends up happening. And I see these feedback loops again and again. Mistakes are a hugely positive thing to frame in this way, and seeing as this growing my instinct, and then in the future investing in me becoming either better at this task or at the skills that this task involves, and basically being an expert in an extra field in my life. And the other better thing here is that when we build instinct and intuition at a task, what we're doing is fueling a source of endless motivation and joy, because we really like to do things that we can do instinctively, because they give us this sort of like dopamine pleasure of going, oh, I'm in the flow, I understand what's happening, I'm feeling really good, and therefore I'm investing in the future and not wanting to quit other tasks and making all other tasks that I do kind of easier through increasing my intuition in the skills that I care about. And so the skills that I mentioned earlier, I keep in mind as being the things that I want to become better at instinctively. And therefore, because I then see all future tasks that I do as a vehicle of improving these skills, I'm in this positive loop of the older I get, the more I work, the less I want to quit things, the more I can make myself interested in things easier, and the better everything becomes. And it just becomes this positive cycle of improvement, which is so wholesome, and it feels absolutely amazing. And I think quite ironically, this instinctual thing is what I'm trying to do with this video, where I'm trying to break down every way that I see things in my life and trying to transfer that into a structure and a format and a template that can hopefully help other people too. Every framework that I've said in this video, I've broken down in a lot more detail with guiding questions in a guide below that also has this template of being able to start projects and then fill them in with these tools and then watch your progress with them. There's no gatekeeping of information or secrets in that template. It's basically everything that I've said in much more detail and structured with a kind of project list and a way to apply this again and again. So if you want to check that out, it will be linked in my description. Otherwise, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Thanks. Bye.